Hello and welcome to the Raising Kellen podcast. My name is Marsh Naidu and I blog at raisingkellen.org, where we curate resources for families experiencing disabilities. On today's episode 161, I chat with Kirsten DesMarias and Molly Rose Hilgenberg, co-host of the podcast Mama, You Belong. Today, they will be sharing information as well as thoughts about Operation Metro Surge. Both these friends live in Minnesota. As always, remember, the information provided on this podcast relates to our personal experience. Resources and calls to action will be linked in the show notes. So grab your cup of coffee, put your feet up, and get ready for some thought-provoking commentary. Kisten and Molly, welcome to the Raising Kellen podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
100%. Guys, we have a lot of ground to cover. But before we get started, please tell listeners a little bit about how you guys came together to get the podcast launched.
Yeah, I'm going to let Molly explain it because this was her doing. Well, I originally met Kirsten because she was my physical therapist, and then I asked her to be my doula when I got pregnant, finally. And she was just such an amazing support. And over the years, I've just been in awe of her and all of her wisdom. And I was driving around one day listening to a podcast, still in the first year of being a new mom, and was like, there's no podcast I know of out there that just talks about how real and raw motherhood is. We should just start something and just try it. And that's what became Mama You Belong.
Now, Molly, your background, you are a mental health therapist, and Kirsten, you are not only a physical therapist and a doula, you are also a teacher, an adjunct professor at the College of St. Scholastica. And guys, Kirsten was my teacher. She taught me health policy, and that seems like 100 years ago, but it was just actually, I think I graduated last summer. But guys, so much has happened within that time. So much has happened within just the beginning of the year, within a 1-month period. First off, I just feel it in my heart to acknowledge Renee Good and Alex Pretty's murders. And Operation Metro Surge is something that we get glimpses of in media. But I truly want to get a better understanding of what's happening. And I ask that you guys perhaps share some stories of families that have been impacted. And if you all could kindly do that to let listeners know exactly what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. We, when we learned that we could join you here and talk about this, we spent the better part of the last week or so trying to get in contact with people that we know are closer in proximity. Molly and I live 2.5 hours north of the Minneapolis area. And while their Operation Metro Surge is targeting areas all over Minnesota, it is really intense in the metro area. And so our own experiences don't necessarily provide the most adequate representation of what life is really like right now for a lot of people. So the stories that we are sharing are from people closer in proximity than us. We have definitely felt some impacts from Operation Metro Surge, but nothing like what families are experiencing in the metro. Do you want to share, or do you want me to share my stories? Why don't you share yours first? Okay. I have 2 stories. I'll share the more brief one first. And I'm just going to read it because I don't want to maybe inadequately or inappropriately summarize the story itself. So this comes from a mom of two who lives in the metro area. I do also want to just state that this person is privileged and white and has never feared for their safety outside of maybe what someone who is white and privileged fears for their safety as being a woman in the world. Mm-hmm. So they said, over the last few weeks, living and working in Minneapolis has been defined by fear, grief, and unexpected depth of community. She goes on to say, my children attend Spanish immersion schools, and because of that, immigration enforcement has touched our daily lives in a very real way. As a school community, parents have organized transportation for daycare staff, created mutual aid funds for groceries and delivery services so staff don't have to leave their homes, and even taken turns standing guard outside of the school to watch for ICE activity. We've learned that sister locations across the Twin Cities have been hit even harder. Teachers detained while waiting for buses, despite being legally authorized to work. The fear and sadness and confusion are overwhelming. Yet alongside that has been an extraordinary growth in connection and care. I've never seen parents so willing to step up to protect teachers and children. They are taking time outside of their already hectic, busy work days to do whatever they can to ensure the safety and security of their neighbors. It has deepened my love for Minnesota and reaffirmed what community can look like in moments of crisis. At the same time, the reality of living under a heavy ICE presence is deeply destabilizing. Unmarked vehicles patrol our neighborhoods, detentions appear arbitrary, and the narrative that ICE is targeting dangerous criminals does not match what we see. Teachers, nurses, pastors, realtors, police officers, ordinary people have been detained simply for being in the wrong place or fitting a vague, racialized description. ICE agents drive recklessly, they smash car windows, they leave vehicles abandoned, and present themselves in military-style gear meant to intimidate. In a city still healing from the trauma of Philando Castile and George Floyd's murder, and rebuilding trust with local law enforcement, this has pushed us backwards. People no longer know who is safe to call for help. Police, hospitals, fire departments, or whether doing so could bring ICE to their door. What many outside the Twin Cities don't understand is how profoundly traumatizing this occupation has been. This feels different from anything before. Nothing feels safe, not schools, grocery stores, hospitals, workplaces, or even our homes. ICE operates without meaningful local oversight, and the constant uncertainty infiltrates every part of daily life. Last weekend, after witnessing Alex Pretty's murder online, I decided I needed to do more, so I went out and joined a local protest. We went to a busy intersection south of Minneapolis with lots of handmade signs, a bit of courage, and low turnout expectations. But to our surprise, nearly every car that passed showed support. I also noticed a common theme in the expressions on people's faces, and it was haunting. You could visibly see the grief, rage, and confusion, exhaustion on people's faces, the eyes of a traumatized community. And yet, standing there together was also healing. It reminded me that I'm not alone, and this suffering is shared, and that community remains our strongest response. She says, I don't know what the answer is to all of this pain, but I know I will continue to stand up for my neighbors in whatever ways I can.
Before you read this person's experience, Kirsten, I'm just reminded I grew up in South Africa, and that was during the apartheid era. And you rightly alluded that the way our bodies might perceive a government entity like ICE varies according to our racial identities. Being a brown-bodied person, I can honestly testify that to you, that seeing a masked man is something that puts me in a total freeze position because it is so closely linked to that amphibian brain of mine who recognizes that trauma of growing up in an environment where policing was associated with brutality and violence. And this is not something we need to have in the United States of America. And I did write a little article on this, and it's called The Born Freeze. And it's recognizing sometime the accountability that comes with living in a democracy, which is what you guys in Minnesota are exemplifying right now, is taking care of your neighbor and staying together as a community, fighting. And when I say that, I mean in a nonviolent way, but resisting and standing up for your neighbor. So I just wanted to say that.
I was just going to add to that. I've heard stories as well of, it's not just first responders, but that people are having reactions to now, but especially children, even when they see like a delivery worker in a uniform, they're having panic attacks because they don't know who's safe and who's not safe. So it's going even beyond people in uniform.
I'll share one other story. This is from a friend of mine who's also a mother and works at the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
And her hope in sharing this is to let people know what life is like, but truly to share some specific accounts and resources that people outside of the state might be able to look at and learn from, because we know that it's challenging to really know what's happening here. So her story shares her personal experience, but these accounts can help you learn more. All right. So Testimony from a Minnesota Mom is the title. I want to shed a bit of light into what life has been like here in Minneapolis, St. Paul during the recent and ongoing surge of ICE in Minnesota. I'm a mom, I'm a neighbor, a person of faith, and I work as an educator at the university here in Minneapolis. Throughout the Twin Cities community, friends and neighbors are fearful and on edge. While federal officials often claim these operations target only criminals, what we are seeing and documenting locally tells a very different story. There are widespread reports of people being profiled based on skin color, language, or accent, including people with legal status. Community members and legal observers have documented agents going door to door, asking people to identify their neighbors, entering homes without presenting warrants, and stopping people on the street, surrounding and damaging vehicles, detaining legal observers, and forcibly taking people from their workplaces, places of worship, and daily routines. Many people are afraid to leave their homes to go to work, acquire basic needs, take their children to and from school, or visit the doctor. Even in emergency situations, and this means that people are struggling to eat, pay their rent, mortgages, and not getting access to critical medical care. I've personally witnessed an ICE raid on my way to work. I often hear cars honking and whistles blowing outside my window. A community alert system warning neighbors of ICE presence. I received countless notifications from neighborhood rapid response groups reporting activity in my area. For many of us, this is not an isolated event, it is daily life. ICE activity has extended into spaces that are supposed to be safe, including schools and daycares, according to reports from families, educators, and local media. There have been documented incidents of tear gas used against students and educators detained during a school day, including individuals with legal status. Following the murder of Renee Good, Minneapolis public schools closed for an entire week due to safety concerns, underscoring how unsafe our community feels right now. Last week in St. Paul, my son's school closed for 2 days to prepare for online learning options for families who do not feel safe leaving their homes. Parents are left wondering whether their children will be safe at school, while children are wondering whether they will have family to return to at home at the end of the day. There are also reports of young children being left alone for days after their parents are detained. As a university educator, I see this fear close up every day. Students tell us they are afraid to leave their homes, to commute to class, or to even walk through parts of campus because federal agents are being housed in nearby hotels. We have had to pivot quickly with our courses to allow students to attend virtually while still offering in-person instruction. Faculty and staff are constantly assessing risk, developing contingency plans, and reviewing protocols of what to do if ICE agents enter our spaces. And honestly, it hardly feels sufficient. Every time I teach, there's a knot in my stomach. What if agents show up to my classroom? What if I'm the one standing between my students and a federal officer? Will they follow protocol? Will they violate my rights, as has been documented in so many other cases? As if the constant fear of gun violence on campuses was not already enough. As a mom, in this moment, I'm in survival mode. I'm doing my best to stay present with my son while juggling the everyday responsibilities of parenting alongside a constant undercurrent of worry. Trying to stay informed without being consumed by it, I wake up to new reports every day, videos of violent encounters shared by journalists and legal observers, a woman pulled from her car on her way to a medical appointment, a pregnant woman thrown to the ground, children maced, an elderly taken from his home without wearing anything but his robe, toddlers separated from their families and flown out of state in violation of court orders, detainees injured and later abandoned in public spaces without phones, identification, or adequate clothing during sub-zero temperatures. These are not isolated stories. They are patterns. It's cruel, it's inhumane, and legal experts argue it's unlawful. But this is not the whole story. What is also happening here is care. There is a vast network of rapid response groups and mutual aid efforts organized by community organizations, schools, faith communities, and neighbors. People are sharing real-time alerts, checking on one another, delivering food, offering rides, standing watch over school drop and pickup times, and making sure no one feels alone. In the face of fear, the people of Minnesota are choosing solidarity. If you're listening from outside of Minnesota, I want you to know that much of this is not being accurately reflected in the national news coverage. Local independent journalists, organizers, faith leaders, legal observers, and BIPOC creators on the ground are documenting what is happening in real time. If you want to understand what is actually unfolding here, it's critical to follow and listen to those voices. I will share the accounts that she would like you to follow in our show notes. She closes with, being informed is the first step, but I want to be clear, this moment demands action. Even small actions matter. Support mutual aid funds if you're able. Support legal defense and civil rights organizations doing the work of litigation and advocacy to protect constitutional rights. Call your representatives and demand accountability and amplify local voices, especially those from communities most directly impacted. She's also included a few different accessible tools that make it possible to take action no matter where you live, and I will share those as well. Lastly, she says, what is happening here matters, not just for Minnesota, but because what is allowed to happen here can happen anywhere.
That's so true, Kirsten. We're looking at the ICE detention facilities, and now it's said that there's going to be one per state. We have one that's like an hour away from us in Mason, Tennessee. And this is the thing, these ICE facilities, whether they're housed in old prisons or warehouses that are now being converted, are all run by these private prison companies. Mm-hmm. And you can do your research and check who these two private prison companies are. But with the One Big Beautiful Act, right, that allocated $175 billion to Homeland Security, with a huge chunk of that specifically to ICE. So my question is, what are all these detention facilities being built for? Are there medical professionals on site providing health care? I think you and I both know the answer to that. This is not a matter of being hyperbolic. You guys have relayed those two testimonials of individuals impacted in Minneapolis, and I think it's time that we ask serious questions. I'm so glad that the last lady that spoke her truth and told her story is providing links to media, because right now, I just don't know whether media is honestly, legacy media can be honestly trusted to bring forth the information of what actually is happening. I think independent media seems to be like emerging. A lot of reporters like Jim Acosta and Don Lemon have gone on to form their own shows. But I mean, like even talking about like Don Lemon, who was like arrested last week, doing his job as a journalist. And I mean, and that's like his First Amendment right, just being able to do his work as a journalist and tell the story or reporting the news of what's going on. I mean, those are civil liberties that are being violated. Just hearing the language of something that is deeply distressing, and I just don't want to offend you guys, or I don't want this to be triggering. But what we're hearing or what sometimes is floated is the term like domestic terrorist, in terms of a person that is protesting, just living out their First Amendment right to free speech. I think living your reality is continuously under attack.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add to that. I appreciate how you're bringing in the Constitution into all of this. And I really appreciate your friend ending with that, because if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere in the States. Our constitutional rights are being completely disregarded in a lot of these situations. And even people who are citizens are now being targeted to be detained. And of course, they eventually get released, but the impacts of the trauma that's happening on families from the detentions. And then, Marsha, I really appreciate what you were saying too about in my opinion, human rights abuses in the detention centers, because we can only imagine if it's this bad in the outside world, in cities of America happening, what is happening inside detention centers. We can't even fully grasp, I don't think, what is happening. I mean, 2 people died in ICE custody alone in January. So, I read a really incredibly horrific story about a woman with her baby who was locked inside a bathroom for like 24 hours with no care. So, there's no stop, there's no end to their cruelty. And I think that, I didn't want to like get too heavy into the trauma, because there is so much happening that is also really powerful. And in terms of community organizing and community support, but I did want to thank you for mentioning all of that. And I know, sorry, you had another question.
Well, the question was that I think a lot of communities, I know there's like communities in New Mexico and Arizona that are speaking out to in their town hall meetings, not wanting these detention centers being built in their communities. And I think, that's something important to keep an eye and ear out for, is to see what's happening in the ground and to actually see right now, I think, right now what's happening in Congress as well is that the budget to the Department of Homeland Security has been put on hold, and it's for another 2 weeks that's been run to see whether they receive their next round of funding. So just that is something as well to, try and reach out to your Congress people, either senator or representatives, to see what is their stance. How do they vote on these issues, so that when it comes time for re-election, that's something most definitely you should think about carrying receipts for. I'm going to get back to that story that I was wanting to tell you, Molly. I, under no uncertain circumstance, will travel anywhere out of my hometown without having my passport with me. I absolutely will not, because it is a very clear pattern of who's perhaps been targeted. And as a person that has a brown skin, people are already starting to take those defensive stances in anticipation of, and that is just not the America that I want to live in.
No, it shouldn't.
That
no
none
one
of
should
us
have to carry their papers with them.
Yeah.
What does that say of our Constitution or its standing?
And I wanted to add to that too, that like we all, I don't imagine grew up thinking we'd be political. I certainly didn't really think I was going to be into like politics. I'm not a policy expert by any means. I focus on clinical work, and I know you do too, but like this lifetime now is so political. Everything about being a parent is political. I mean, not only do we have to worry about a detention center being built near us, but also data centers, right, for AI. So it's just like everything that's happening affects us. And I think we can't really put our heads in the sand anymore and just focus on what's in front of us. I think we have to start making those awkward phone calls and emails to our representatives, because we can't keep just focusing on what's right in front of us anymore.
Yeah. And I think getting back to, Marsh, what you were saying about maybe language around domestic terrorist, or labeling a lot of things as protest. And that's a really easy way for people who are currently comfortable with the status quo to label what is happening here in Minnesota and other states, because they can't really consider any other reality. But what I'd like to say is actually that I think a lot of people, like I love Minnesota and I'm so proud to be a Minnesotan. But what I do truly believe is that if Operation Metro Surge, the way it has unfolded, occurred in another city like ours, I believe that the community would stand up and that they would respond the way Minnesotans have responded. Because when an outside force challenges your very reality and your neighborhood's safety and like literally way of life, I believe that other people would stand up too. And what I want out of this is to see the care networks and mutual aid and community stay active after Operation Metro Surge is concluded in however way it concludes. But the significant changes to how communities work together right now and are supporting one another are things that I never want to see disappear. But when people hear these accounts and when they maybe see things on the news or social media and they want to keep it at arm's length and say, I could never, or I would never, or they want to label things as extremism, I just want to say, I bet you would, because I think you love your neighbors and your community as much as we love ours.
Yes. I think that is so grounding, guys. I think that is so grounding. Y'all did an episode, y'all just talked about Renee Good. And y'all talked at the end, y'all kind of came up with some techniques as well about how sometimes you cannot just completely dissociate. You cannot just live in your moment with your family. You have to look at the community at large. So I would like to link that episode as well to the show notes so that listeners can get that valuable information and extract that from that episode. Guys,
Oh, I'm sorry, Marsh.
Oh, no, go ahead,
I just
Molly.
wanted to kind of center for a moment too, just children in all of this. I think those letters were so beautiful in centering what it's like from a community level and as parents and how they're doing with all of it and what they're seeing. And I just wanted to add and center from a few friends who are right in Minneapolis. They've just added that the children in that community are hurting so badly. They are so angry and they're so scared. There are helicopters flying over constantly. They're living in chronic stress, even if they're not, directly in fear of being detained. No child right now feels safe and content in that community. And what's hard for parents is it depends on what level of comprehension their child is at, what they can explain to them, but they're having to explain at much younger levels to their children what's going on. And it makes me think about how many Black parents talk about how they have to teach their children at a much younger age, right? Of like how to handle being around law enforcement or something like that. Yes. Conversations white parents never have to worry about. But just living in this directly collective, like traumatic experience right now, and centering, like, if we care about anything, we should care about our future, right? About our future of our country and how children are doing and the chronic stress that they're under, and yet one hopeful thing I wanted to add was a friend shared that her son is in third grade and he not only says things like, "Mom, I'm glad you didn't have a childhood like this," but he works on projects in his school with his friends on how to create advocacy projects for immigrants and how to find hope in hard times. Like, they're working on these projects in school and they're trying to find ways to feel abundant in their love for each other, even though they're worried their classmates might not show up the next day. So I just wanted to share that and really center children in this conversation too.
Folks who might still have a hard time processing the stories that we've shared and our conversation, and who might still believe this is not reality, I would really want them to consider reading this essay, and it's by Václav Havel, and it's called The Power of the Powerless. And this was written in Czechoslovakia in about 1978. And the author talks about the greengrocers put out a sign in their window saying, "Workers of the world, unite," even though that wasn't the reality of what was happening in that totalitarian government regime. And it talked about the disconnect of what was actually happening to the reality of their lives. So it was the lie versus the reality. And how we sometimes, what are the avenues, or what are the things or strategies we sometimes need to pull on to not live in that lie. Molly, you are the like a mental health therapist. Can you perhaps, like, how do we, besides obviously listening to stories, being out in nature, how can we draw on our environment or the things that might be around us to kind of calm our nervous system, to regulate it, to perhaps be more grounded, so that we would be not more willing, but more able to understand the complexities of what's happening?
Oh, I love your question. So, I mean, I will be honest, I've had a hard time regulating through all of this because it's just been so overwhelming to, tangentially, adjacently follow everything that's happening. And so even just if you're digesting this, and just starting to really learn more about what's happening, you might notice how your heart races a little more, or how you clench your muscles, or So I always recommend like just paying attention to your body when you're consuming information and digesting news stories. Take breaks. Currently, I've deleted social media from my device because I just need a break. I can't keep scrolling and looking at everything, even though it's so important to be informed. There has to be sometimes where you give yourself scheduled breaks. I think it's very important to carve out at least an hour before bedtime that is not around screens, around consuming news or information. I won't even go into like what's also been happening, right? Like with all of the Epstein files being released and just how horrifically triggering that is for so many survivors, and people who love their kids, too. And so anyway, like when that's all going on, we need to carve out time to practice simple tools like deep breathing, noticing where you feel tense in your body, simple practices like even just a long hot shower and noticing mindfully what it feels like to wash your hair or use some nice scents or something, like just engaging with your five senses and taking those breaks to ground and come back, because we all kind of get a little overwhelmed and dissociated when we're getting too, dysregulated by these horrific things that are happening. And I really think on top of all of that, so those are like self-care practices, but I really believe that self-care is community care. So once we're taking care of ourselves and we can find ways to regulate, then if we feel angry, if we feel outraged, the best form of working through that kind of collective grief is to take action. So that can be right through making those phone calls to your senators about the upcoming, policy, or you can find, something in your own community and connect with your neighbors about maybe even just having preparation for mutual aid if something were to happen, because I think a lot of folks from Minneapolis are saying we wish we had been more prepared.
Yeah.
We wish we had known what was going on in Chicago to the level of like what could happen here. So, yeah.
Oh, Molly, Kirsten and Molly, that is invaluable information, and thank you so much for taking the time to inform us of the realities and also to just create an awareness and just a wake up call as well. Are there any words of encouragement or just any message that you would like to get to the listener today, or how would you all like to bring this to a close?
Well, I really think a part of why we started Mama You Belong was to help moms feel seen and not alone, or at least less alone, because it is an isolating experience to be in motherhood or parenthood. And so if you're listening and you are feeling alone in carrying the weight of understanding these really scary things that are happening in our country right now, to find your buddy system, to find your community and your friends, and reach out, because we can't carry this heavy load alone. We weren't meant to.
I don't know if I have anything to add to that.
I think that's, beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you both you guys for taking this time to spend your evening with us. And I'm going to go ahead and say bye, and then I'll stop the record button. So once again, we will put the resources that Molly and Kirsten are going to share with us in the show notes, as well as add it to the social media post where folks may be more likely to access this podcast episode. So until we see you guys again, you all take care.
Thank you so much for having us, Marsh. Thank you.
Oh, yes, ma'am. So Thank you to both Molly and Kirsten for coming onto the podcast today to create perspective as well as a timeline of what's happened since the beginning of 2026. I would like to list the following. Renee Good was killed on January the 7th, 2026. Alex Pretty was killed on January 24th, 2026. This episode was recorded with Molly and Kirsten on February the 9th, 2026. On February the 12th, Tom Homan, who is the face of the current administration that is carrying out Operation Metro Surge, noted that ICE would be withdrawing from Minnesota. Today is February 22nd, 2026, and I've just heard back from Kirsten, and I would like to read the following email to you. This is with regards to whether ICE indeed dissipated in Minneapolis. And here is Kirsten's response to what is still needed. I would like to say that mutual aid efforts matter more than ever. ICE presence is still very real despite announcements of a drawback. Those who live in Minneapolis, St. Paul area still vocalize violence from ICE agents and ongoing detention of their neighbors. As always, friends, remember, stay connected. There's much to be said as well as done. Please check out the show notes for the link to resources mentioned. I mentioned an essay that was written called The Power of the Powerless. This is a 80-page essay, but is indeed well worth reading over. Please check out the show notes as well to the links provided of those reporters who are on the ground in Minneapolis, shared by our friends from Mama You Belong podcast. Reach out to your friends from different states to find out what is actually going on and what are their experiences on the ground. As always, get to the top of your mountain. This is Marsh Naidu signing off.